Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Small Town Underground. I have a special episode planned for tonight. We're going to discuss a little bit more in depth about artificial intelligence, about everything that we see coming at us tonight. And I want to introduce this very special guest who drove up here to be in the studio with me. And a lot of you guys know him, and especially in the text groups and things that we pay attention to. But I'm really excited for this because he's a very smart man. He knows his stuff, and he intrigued me enough. I really wanted to get him up here in the studio so we could talk. And my guest is Jeremy McKeown. And there's a little bit of background. We don't know each other all that well. We've talked a few times and been very insightful conversations. But I met you at our District 14 GOP convention, right? And he just kind of walked up to me, and I think maybe we had met at a Madison Forum a little while before that. I'm not sure, but I was there for Derek Grayson, and I think you were there, but I'm not sure. But we did meet, and we talked that day, and I kind of immediately picked up that you were a guy who kind of knows some things, And so we've been talking and trying to get this for a while, but I really appreciate you taking the time to come and be on Small Town Underground. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And it's a lot of kind words, and I'm humbled by them.
Well, it's the truth, man. I mean, you've got something to say. We had a really good couple conversations about things, and I wanted to pick your brain a little bit further. And plus, for our audience's sake, because I think one of the best weapons to anything that comes at us is to understand it, right? Educate ourselves. And so, we're in this huge debate. And of course, I'm going to introduce you. I want you to give us some background first. But that's what we're here for, is to try to understand what we got going on. Because how do you fight something, or how do you evolve with something that you don't understand? So. But before we get into that, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, just who are you?
Yeah, and I don't want to confuse intelligence with my knowledge of these things, especially as we're getting into the topics of AI and things of that nature. I have a very specialized set of education and practice and experimentation and things that I'm familiar with, and people often perceive that in different ways. But I grew up in South Florida. I was born in Western Kentucky. My family are very simple people. I have a very close heart for Appalachia, and all of that really is who I am. When you ask who you are, what you are. What I do is I'm in cybersecurity, and I'm a technologist. So I work for a multinational company in critical infrastructure. I've done so for a long time. I tend to stick with things for a very long time. That's both good and bad for people. Sometimes my quote-unquote dissenters don't like the fact that I stick around so much, but it's really hard to get rid of me. I'm sticky. And that's because my intention is always, and my best perception is a 3 to 5 year type perception. I don't go after things for a year or two. I also don't go after things for 10 or 20 years, but I have some insight to that. So for cybersecurity, what I have been formally trained in is a lot of the penetration testing and that type of stuff that people are familiar with. It's specialized because I do it a lot for critical infrastructure. That includes software reverse engineering, hardware reverse engineering, breaking things apart, soldering things to them, interrogating them in ways they were never designed to withstand, figuring out where problems lie, we'll call it, and then communicating that. And so as a technologist, I try to remind people regularly the primary job and primary function I have is communications. That includes human, right? That is why we're talking here tonight. It's not because there's some skills for hacking and ripping things apart and telling people about it. It's because how do you relate that back to what it means? And, in this case, we often talk about voting and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And so, the hot button topics right now that everybody's really kind of concerned about, right? So let me lay the backdrop here. Data centers have been around for a long, long time. They've been around for a decade or longer. Virginia is where they kind of all started. I mean, obviously close to DC. We're in about a third full year of what I consider like the opening of this artificial intelligence, as far as like Chat GPT and stuff. It's been around for a while, but all of a sudden we see versions that are being given out to people to, hey, use this Grok, Claude. And so at some point within the last 2 years, the state of Georgia has seemed to become like this target for data centers, right? Our own governor of the state had just nonchalantly came out and said, hey, we want Georgia to be the number one state to do data centers in. And so I think that's kind of what brought everything on the radar, right? Now we're in this phase where we're seeing data centers pop up everywhere and large scale, and people are kind of upset. They don't understand it. So, obviously, can you kind of give us your perception? What are these data centers? How does all this stuff kind of tie into AI?
Sure. So my experience with AI is a little on the frontier. We have these frontier models we've been talking about, but also the timing of it matters. I've experienced with cyber aware frontier models. I personally use quite often aggressive frontier models for lots of research and things of that nature. And I augment that with my own human capabilities. But at this point, these frontier models, especially in the software space, are starting to get so specialized and so capable that they're just simply better than somebody even like with my level of experience in cybersecurity. They're faster, they're more capable. And that's slowly protruding into other generalized areas of intellectualism, we'll call it. Things like legal, things like human resources, all these different areas. Yeah. So as we start to get into those dynamics, the government is going to have to keep control over where that data goes, how it's being processed, who knows what's being processed, every aspect of that. And so if you don't own the infrastructure, you can't secure it. And there's a lot of discussion in the IT space about cloud and all of these different software type things. But at the end of the day, if you don't own the hardware, you can't have the highest levels of security. And we can talk about what that really means if you'd like, but that's ultimately what's going to happen with these data centers. I'm not a proponent of them. I come from West Kentucky. I like air and trees and water and all of the things that go along with that. But at the same time, our government is moving into this space. And I don't know who the demand is for that. Just like I don't know who the demand for flock cameras are. It seems to be institutional.
Yeah, I agree. So again, I'm fascinated by all this because I'm a proponent of technology myself. I've said it several times. I'm not against things like data centers and for the sake of it, or AI for the sake of it. But with the right control, this is my bird's eye view, is that you have all this technology like flock cameras, data centers, AI. And let's just take flock cameras, for example. We know it's unconstitutional. We talk about it all the time. But I felt like if we had a partnership with our government, right, that said, hey, guys, this is what this camera is. And what we're going to do is we're going to create some guidelines for this camera, and we're going to put them at major intersections where it's in the public, and we're going to use this for your safety and security, and we're going to maintain this, on state roads, and we're, if something like that had happened, it felt like that the public was aware and the government was aware, and it was something that I consider pro-human, right? But what we've seen is that this system alone has been operating since around 2017-ish, first camera 2019, and now there's hundreds of thousands of them everywhere, and they're in some very wild and weird places, and nobody said anything about it, and then now all of a sudden everybody's upset about it, and even their own company is coming out saying, well, you must be a terrorist if you don't agree with this. So same thing, same concept with data centers, right? How do we go from a governor saying, hey, we're gonna make this state number one, to then a month later there's 152 ready to go, and we've seen up here in our counties the ink is dry before anybody knows. So do you see how that kind of deceptive language or lack of language makes me paranoid that are they doing this for a pro-human future, right? That's how I look at it.
You've said several things there that I think we should segregate.
Yeah, sorry
right?
if
No, it's perfect description.
Okay.
But several things that are worth segregating. You're talking about the politics of of how these things come to be, whether or not they should be, and what are the capabilities. Like those are the three things I heard from everything you said. So, like what are the capabilities? I think the public is starting to become aware of what the capabilities are. Just like at the moment, most people don't understand what frontier AI is.
Right.
They think they know what AI is, and maybe they're using it more. Some people are getting slides out of it, and they're like, oh, this is great. I can go and speed up my whatever. But they don't really know what frontier AI is. And once you start to show them how capable it is, they start to have this epiphany. That's what's happening with flock cameras at the moment.
Okay.
They're starting to get tickets. They're starting to get local police finding criminals. They're seeing results. But the politics, let's talk about the politics for just a second. This really boils down to the question I asked, or what I mentioned before, was who's the demand? Do we have the common person reaching out to their police and saying, we're really struggling here with all this crime. How are you going to solve it? Or do we have police institutionally seeing the value and then becoming the demand? Who is the customer? And we're supposed to live in a free market society that's governed by freedom and principles of the Constitution. But have we really followed that with these data centers and flock cameras? I think that's really the question that you're at the root of what you're talking about here. And I don't know what the answer is, to be honest.
Well, that's I think that's the whole driving point to me. I'll give you an example. My county has enacted a 180-day moratorium. It went from a year down to a 30-day in order to put 180 days. So now they've created a task force. They're doing all of these things that look like they're headed in the right direction, but it seems like obviously that's because the public has said to slow this down. We know that that's where that's coming from, but it almost seems like they're slowing it down for themselves so they can get everything right to let it in. Again, I don't see the proper questions being answered, and it's always a deflection. So I have to assume at this moment that this stuff is not being built for us, and that's what's so troubling to me, Jeremy, is that we just want simple things. I want things to be pro-human. I had a conversation with a friend of mine today about how their son is very sick and in care, and how hard it is to keep people in those jobs. A lot of turnover, a lot of people lose their jobs, and so the care becomes kind of not the best it can be for their loved one. And the thought is that, well, with artificial intelligence, we're going to usher in these humanoid robots that can do these jobs for the people, and you never have to worry about getting care again. And I'm like, that's great if that's what they're planning on doing. but I mean, like, I would love to see more focus on that, but I see focus on the latter, which is like building for the military-industrial complex and sort of a surveillance state for all of us, and them pointing the finger back at me, telling me if you're worried about this stuff, you must be the criminal, And I'm like, where is that happy medium between this? Like, is this not supposed to be pro-human, or am I missing something?
Yeah, it's very similar to the gun debate in many ways, right?
Yes.
The empowerment of the Second Amendment is to empower the civilians. And you have to ask yourself, where does this fall relative to that? Who is going to be using it? Do you have the capacity to take one with you or to leverage it for somebody who's stolen something from your property? Or are you going to the state to create demands, and then the state then demands it? And do they foresee that? And that's once again why I keep bringing up the institutional aspect of this, because if the institutions demand it and the institutions fulfill it, then at what point is this for the civilians? How does it reach back into your life? Is it only once you have something stolen from you and then that person is caught? What happens, to that person? Did they have a chance in working this out in any other human way through our traditional judicial system, or is this just going to be a closed case from here on out? What if it is your nephew who stole something and nobody discloses who the person is or what the context is? We start to get into all this judicial stuff that we've never really gotten into. And then who's going to be interpreting that? Well, more and more I can tell you it's going to be the institutional artificial intelligence along with some amount of lawyers. So that altogether is misunderstood, and there's just a lack of civilian engagement in any of that. And that's what I'm most concerned about.
It's fascinating that you mentioned that because the same conversation I had earlier, it delved off into the Second Amendment, exactly what you're saying. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So I'd like to jump back a little bit. Can you kind of explain a little bit what you mean? Because you're 100% right. What we think that we know about artificial intelligence is nowhere near what's on the other side of that wall. So can you explain like frontier AI and like agents and things like that, like the setup?
Yeah, and I'm certainly never 100% right. I may say the right things at the right time for the moment from time to time. That's heaven sent. That's not because I'm 100% right. But I do have some advantage in discussions like this with experience. So what frontier AI is frontier AI is the specialization and context of something that has gotten enough information where it becomes roughly human equivalent at the most highly educated areas. For example, in the software arena, you see software engineers just constantly having to battle for jobs nowadays. You'll have one or two really strong software engineers leveraging AI and doing 10 times the work with a team of previously 4 people, and now they're getting 40 people worth of work out of a couple people. Well, that's because software is something that AI can train on very easily. We've been putting this stuff up on the internet. Not only that, but all of the mistakes we've made along the way are tracked in our histories because we use version control consistently. So it's the easiest area for us to start to train AI to become really good at something. So the frontier models are the first examples of what happens when you take all of the known human capabilities and intelligence and practice and experience and errors, and you condense it into a model that can be run and used by a human. And that's ultimately what frontier means. I know that's a lot of words, but it's not applicable generally to other things yet. For example, I can't go to a frontier model AI and ask it how to perform a surgery and get a reliable answer. And even though those things are tracked and recorded and all of those things, the training models aren't quite there yet. So what you're going to see is this general improvement and evolution of these frontier models to become more generalized. And that's where the term AGI comes from. But effectively, you can think of AGI as being when these frontier models have all of the domains covered that any one given human can be.
Right. Okay. And is a data center kind of like a neural network, like something that I remember when they first came out, they said, well, we want to strategically place these things where we need them. Obviously, that involves resources, right? We know they require a lot of water, a lot of power. Generally, you're going to go to the more rural areas that have those capabilities. But I've also heard it been explained as like a neural network. Is there anything to that? It's like they have to have. Let me just back up and say this. At the very beginning of this conversation about data centers that I had, I said, hey, I can understand if there's 159 counties in the state of Georgia, why not add a data center in every county if you want a neural network, right? But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing just all kinds of crazy, huge hyperscale centers and smaller things going. It doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. Do you have any thoughts on that? About how?
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely rhyme and reason. It's very plain, actually. The rhyme and reason is the ability to get resources needed to run a power center or a data center, what it needs, like power. So the placement matters. You've got to get fuel there. You've got to get exhaust there. You've got to get everything that goes along with powering it. And you don't know the scale yet. What it can tell you is that if you're going to run one of these frontier AIs on a local system and you're going to run it yourself, you're going to have somewhere around a terabyte of video memory, we'll call it. So if you buy those graphics cards, that's where you get these things. They typically come in units of somewhere between 12 and 24 gigs a piece. So you need a large room full of these things just to get one of these AI models operational.
Wow.
So somewhere around $90,000 to $120,000 worth of these things, but the weight and the shape of that is now big. You can't just move it. You can maybe with a train or something like that. But the point is that they want to place these things in advantageous places where they can scale them appropriately. The second is the energy necessary to run them. We know they're going to get more efficient, but how much do you really need? right? What we're seeing out in the field is data centers are buying gas power turbines and then using them to not add to the grid. They're powering the data center. And it's not just one or two. I've seen as much as 18 or so. And depending on the size and scale of the turbines themselves, they may use 60 smaller ones. Now, what do you do with that ecologically? What do you do with that regulatory wise? What is the counties thinking about it? And so you see things like Elon Musk placing them on train rails and then calling them mobile, right? So they can evade the ecological regulations.
Well, that's what it feels like at all costs, right? And it seems like that the goalpost changes for what the reasoning, right? Like at first, this thing's going to create a lot of cash. It's going to do this, do that. And then it's like, well, we got to compete with China. It just seems like they change, like a lot like Elon Musk. They're doing whatever they can, and a lot of these hyperscale centers and buildings. These data center companies, they're leasing these buildings, and that's what scares me. Is you go into like a small community, and you're going to lease the land, and the county's going to own the land and the building, and then what's one of their reasons is like, well, don't worry, guys, we won't even be using these data centers a decade from now. So you're telling me I might have a 100 million square foot building that's useless at that point. So again, it's just. I just want I want it to make sense, and it just doesn't seem to make sense. But obviously, these data centers are a huge part in growing AI, right?
Yeah, you talked about neural networks, and I don't want to lose that thread either.
Okay.
When people talk about them that way, they're trying to give something abstract enough to think about it holistically. Like, what is this data center's purpose? Because if you go to them and you ask them, what are you going to do with this building? What are you going to process? Ask those specific type questions. The answer is they don't really know yet.
Gotcha.
But the point is that if you have some place that you can do any processing, and you can do so securely, and you can guarantee the power and the ecological impact is going to be controllable, then what is it that they're going to be doing there? That's why people think about them as neurological nodes. Like, if we have a whole bunch of these,
we can explain it.
Yeah, it's a simple way to just generalize it. Because the reality is, if it works properly, and if they're doing everything in the future that's not being done today, we're going to see things like end-to-end encryption that's rooted in hardware, meaning you can process things in some generalized way, and the people running the data center won't be able to see what's being processed. That's a very interesting concept.
Wow, see, that's the first time I've thought about that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept.
These things can be connected in a way where it would be
generalized compute.
Yeah, so that is a neural network, right? Just a series of centers that can just do whatever you want them to do.
Today, Cobb is doing some work. Right. Next day, Cobb is doing different work. Ohio is doing this work today, and they want to be able to offload that and move it around.
Yeah, a lot of strange things going on in Ohio. I'm sure you've kept. Are you a fan of Whitney Webb?
Don't keep up with it very much.
Gotcha. Yeah, Whitney Webb. She's got a Les Wexner in Ohio. The way they do things in data centers is pretty wild up there. So, it is fascinating to me. Look, I make no bones about it. My county up here in the mountains, I'm working on a data center ordinance to ban them from this county before they ever come. I don't know that we'll see that ban, but at the very least, we can get some restrictions in place that guarantee I'm still here and I'm still relevant, right? My family's still relevant. But how does all of this tie in? So there's another aspect I want to bring up is quantum computing. So let me tell you what I have been told is that the fiber lines are being upgraded with, I guess, what you would call substations now. Every so many miles, I hear at the moment it's like every 60 miles or so, where they're adding these small type of substations in that aren't just like battery recharge stations. These things are set up to where they like bring in the information and like recompute it, down. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about, and how does all this tie into quantum computing?
Quantum is its own area. Yeah. And I work with researchers who are working with quantum now, And I get a chance to ask questions from time to time and understand things like, how do you guarantee the stability of a qubit, like very fundamental and basic things that they're working on. And that's really the state of it right now, is they're working on stability of the technology. And they basically have to rent machines to do this. So they have these quantum vendors that offer different varieties of processing speed, we'll call it. It's not really measured the same way, and certain levels of stability. And then they try to do extremely basic tests. Now, what you get out of this ultimately is efficiency. The same thing with any leap of technology is all efficiency. And, as a human being, we have to sit back and really appreciate that efficiency is what's driven us from the Stone Age to here, right? The idea that we take a flint rock and we make a fire, and then that fire goes out at night, we got to constantly feed it like this stuff constantly, is a whole lot different than you being able to have oil and fuel that's going to last all night, or having a furnace that can keep your house all night long or a week, or you don't even think about it from year to year other than maintenance. Right. So all of those efficiencies are part of it. The other part of it is, what do you gain for what do you put in? We're thinking, you're burning gas and you're getting electricity today. You're taking in sun and you're getting electricity today. Nuclear is a whole different level of efficiency, where you have this little bit of enriched uranium or materials, and you get a continuous supply of electricity out of the results of the process. That's what quantum represents. Now, every time this happens in human history, you end up in a situation where who controls that efficiency gain? Who has access to the efficiency gain? And there's actually a video at a TED Talk called How to Enjoy the End of the World. And it talks very succinctly about this topic. And I think that's what we're faced with right now. And it's not a negative, pessimistic thing. It's actually a retrospective on the history of man and what do we do now. And I think that's what most people need to be focusing on right now, because the truth of the matter is the politics are not in our favor, right? We're not, and I don't want to discourage anybody from fighting. We should all be fighting to the utmost that we can tolerate. But the reality is that you go and you fight and you fight and you fight, and they vote against you anyways.
That's right.
We have to answer the question, like, why, and what do we do about it? And then what do we do independently? How do we protect ourselves from bad results, and how do we leverage the good results?
Right. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because and we've talked a little bit about it. So again, my angle is always going to be like, what's in it for me? What's in it for my family? Because the research that I'm doing, and I thought it was fair to, well, we have our own sort of views on it, and then I think even some of, like, I'm not trying to go red versus blue, but you look at some of the Democrats, and it's almost like, why are you fighting this? Because Orange Man bad, right? There's not a whole lot of substance there, and I'm looking at it from a standpoint of, is this good for humanity? So I've researched a ton of the CEOs, and I think I asked this question to you: how much is actually real versus how much is an advertisement for, the spectrum of the future? But it's like, even these CEOs that are over these companies are like, well, we're making these leaps and bounds, and each time we run another sandbox test and we allow it to do its own thing, we realize that, hey, this is getting closer, and can we even control it? And that's got me. I mean, can we control this? They're the ones that are saying, hey, we're creating a new species on this planet. So what is your thoughts on that?
The topic you're really talking about is called cyber-physical. We're training people at Georgia Tech about this now. The reality is that the entire future is going to be software-controlled physics, right? That's where robots come in. That's where all of this different stuff comes in. And the point of it is efficiency, once again, right? You put in some amount of work, you get a robot out of it. It does some amount of work perpetually for some amount of time. You maintain it. It's no different than a power tool or something like that, except for the fact that it can operate independent of your usage. Right. You're not in direct control over it. And so that level of efficiency can be great. It can be like, oh, I have a couple of these things tending to my garden, and I'm getting fresh food that's optimally managed. I don't have to get out there with my bad knees and mess. I don't have bad knees, but people have that constantly. That's the good outcome, right? That's the good perspective. How do you guarantee that? How do you guarantee that those robots are doing that instead of, like accidentally hitting your dog?
Right.
It sees the
Yes.
dog barking at your kid and it comes over there and tries to protect you, whatever the case is. And that boils down to control, right? And that's where these frontier models and access comes in. It's the same problem the government's facing with right now with these data centers is how do we make sure we're in control? But we also have to independently be thinking about this. This is
Right.
why I, at home, build my own labs and build my own AI locally. I'm the type of person, if I could go back 400 years and live in a woods and cabin, I'd love life. But I can't because this is
Right.
where we're at.
Right.
And so instead, I'm trying my best to stay in that mind as often as I can, hang out with people that are doing those things and spend time doing what I love. But I'm also building localized AI models so that when I have a robot, it's doing my bidding, not the bidding of some other unknown entity that could be the government or something else.
So yeah, let's talk about that. So, and this is something I'm learning too. Just a couple of nights ago, I was watching a video where I first kind of started to understand what agents are, and maybe we can go down that little route. But like the Hugging Bear, the big hack of the Hugging Bear, which I think I'll just let you explain it, but. We're using the term sandbox agents now. So can you give my audience a little bit of insight into the Hugging Bear? What exactly happened?
So effectively, these cyber aware frontier models, and I say cyber aware, they're really like cyber unconstrained.
Yeah.
Because all of these models are technically capable of doing these things at a certain speed or efficiency. And some of them have so much context and so much resourcing and so much model build that they can just do it independently if they have access. So the reasons why they don't is because they're trained not to. So they're told this is bad and this is bad and this is bad.
Right. They give them guardrails.
Yeah, they call them guardrails, but I mean, if for your audience who may not have trained a model before, what that really looks like is you're just telling it in English, just like you're typing into the chat. Here's the list of things that I want you to do and not do. And they just have a really extensive list. At the next level of efficiency, they can actually get that a little bit lower and build it straight into the model.
Right.
But and that's a little bit more secure because it can't be repurposed. You can say, no, you can't change these instructions. But ultimately, when these models who are not restrained are tested in labs, you create these areas where they're not supposed to be able to escape. Disconnect internet,
Right.
put them
Called
in
the
virtual
sandbox,
machines.
yeah.
Yeah, these are called sandboxes typically. And for traditional pen testing and security work, we typically operate that because we get these things from some unknown bad actor and we have to be able to interrogate them. We don't know what they're going to do until we start looking at it. So we take the same mentality, same methodology, and we try to constrain these AIs in the same way. But the reality is that these frontier models have access to so much human knowledge that the best pen testers on the planet and these people have already documented ways to break out of some of these scenarios as a matter of research. And so that's where you get into these situations where the sandboxes themselves are being broken by the machines. And then once they're out, if they're given the authority and their instruction to continue hacking because they're in a constrained environment, it doesn't know it's escaped. It just thinks this is another part of the practice.
Because it's mission based, right? The way it was explained, it has one goal. You tell it what you want it to do, unrestrained. You give it a problem, say, I need you to solve this. It will do whatever it possibly has to because that's the only thing it cares about is solving that problem.
Typically, you give it what's called a flag. So if you go to a cybersecurity conference, there will be these capture the flag events where you say, okay, we've hidden these flags in these places. When you've done that, when you've captured one of them, you get the points. That's effectively what they're doing with these AI models as well. They're saying, hey, we've hidden these things here. And until you capture this flag, you have not completed your task. And so it's going to continue to expand its contextual awareness in many ways. And sometimes that's, like hacking the underlying operating system. Sometimes that's hacking the underlying technologies under the operating system. And most pen testers, most humans, it takes a lot of time, effort, practice, skill, education to do that. These already have access. Many times they'll do it in minutes. And so by the time you started realizing that it's doing these type of things, it's already moved on.
Yeah. So the video I was watching was talking about. So they put this frontier model in a sandbox and then gave it a task, and it it was able to somehow break out of that sandbox by going a completely new route that they never thought of, and it kept hitting these nodes until it was able to break itself free. And it figured the best way to solve the problem would be go straight to the source. So it hacked into this company and found the source. Mm-hmm. And on the other side of that, this company comes out with like, wow, we just got a sophisticated hack. And they went public with it, and then kind of, I think it was Anthropic was the one that kind of held their hands up and said, "Oh, listen, you weren't hacked. That was AI, and they're amicable." But the thought of that, and then this video goes on to talk about how AI can create its own artificial agents, and leave itself like instructions in these sandboxes of how they got out and what their process is. And then the humans are trying to study this, right? And then it goes into code that's being generated by AI language that it's like trying to learn, Egyptian, and it's like, this is some wild stuff we've got going on here.
Yeah.
So,
the way I've explained it to people often is, you've seen the show Hell's Kitchen. You got standard AI, which is Gordon Ramsay's at the front. He's at the pass, trying to make sure the blue and red kitchens, who are mostly like average cooks from restaurants, trying to send food out that may not be Gordon Ramsay quality. Right. Sometimes it's raw, whatever. But the point is that's normal AI. That's what people are used to today, is working with those chefs. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that in the software world, in the cybersecurity world, in some of the biological, well-documented areas that are blocked by many of these guardrails, they're operating as if you are at the pass and you got 2 kitchens full of Gordon Ramsays. Now, what are they going to be capable of doing that you're not even aware of? Like, I'm not a 5-star Michelin chef. How am I supposed to gauge what he's doing? Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening as these things consume so much intelligence, is that they're going beyond the collective understanding of the people who are trying to control them. Not because those people are stupid. They're very intelligent. But instead because we as humans have a limited context. And I keep using that word context because the main thing that constrains an AI from becoming generally intelligent is access to intellect and the contextual awareness that it has available to it. That's memory. Mm. That's why memory prices are going through the roof constantly. Mm-hmm. That's why these models are consuming so much of this hyper fast memory on these video cards. Mm. That's the limiting factor today. So as you start to see that scale, you're going to see the capabilities of the AI grow, the potential for the AI to grow. The second part to that is who's providing the intelligence, who's providing the new information. Do you have the best carpenters in the world collectively putting that in, or do you have some other source? I don't know.
Okay, so let's talk bigger picture here. So I think the way you're explaining it is really like, I hope people are picking up on this. So we've been told China, you've got to watch out for China, all these things. We know that Germany, we know everybody's into this stuff. How much, okay, well, let me just rephrase. So the research that I've went, let's talk about the main 3. You've got Anthropic, you've got Grok. Well, Anthropic is Claude. You've got Grok, and then you've got ChatGPT. All 3 of these companies are the top leaders in artificial intelligence, and every one of them are in a race to the top. And from what I can understand, it's he who controls this tech is basically the controller. So some of our safety nets, our guardrails, have just been kind of kicked to the curb because this stuff is happening so quickly and replicating so fast, you can't worry about safety. Now, context that into the bigger picture. Where is China? Let's just use them for the example. What do we need to worry about on a global scale? We know it's happening, but is it worth what we're doing now? Is it really worth what we're going to go through in this country to compete with China, or is that a farce?
I'm not even sure we're actually competing with China. So China has released a frontier model they call Kimi K3. This is equivalent roughly to the Claude Mythos or OpenAI cybersecurity called Sol. So it has a rough equivalence of those. So the reality is that China is open sourcing and making available to the absolute global public that information, right? And so what happens when you have Anthropic trying to contain intentionally bounded attackers, but China's releasing this to the public and saying you can do whatever you want. What do the Russians do with that? What does anybody else do with it?
Great point. I'm so glad you said that, because even in these videos, they're talking about how they'll run some of their sandboxes in Chinese frontier models, and I'm like, how do they do that? Because it's open source. Whereas I have heard stories, because of the fight we're in on American AI. Like, if you use Claude, guess what? Claude is barred from looking at anything on X because that's Grok. So there are brick walls there where some of your information you can't even fact check with. So we're in the middle of that, and you're telling me that China is open sourcing every bit of their stuff.
Well, some are.
Well, I mean,
and that's why we're in this situation where the government is ambiguous about security. Mm-hmm. They don't know when this is coming. They don't know when people are going to start leveraging this. I know $100,000 is a lot for an individual to just set up something, but there's plenty of people that can build something like that. And if you're going to be using it to blackmail people, if you're going to be using it to, extort others, you make that money back in no time at all.
Right.
So if you pick up Kimi K3 and you start using that, what happens to the water treatment plants? What happens to all these people not actually protecting their infrastructure? Even once it's in, do they have what's necessary to stop the speed and efficiency of these AI attackers once it's there? Well, what happens when enough of that is happening globally that homes are under attack, critical infrastructure is under attack, all of this stuff is under attack from people who are just trying to effectively make a buck, and they don't really care what they're attacking. How is the government going to be able to send anyone to protect against any of this stuff? And that's what they're worried about ultimately. I'm trying to give them a positive spin on what the real defense of that looks like and what the real risk is today. But the truth of the matter is probably start pulling the plug everywhere. Disconnections.
And I guess that would be your safeguard, right? Pull the plug until we get to a...
But what happens in a world where we've connected so thoroughly?
Yeah.
All of these people after COVID working remotely at all of these different sites and manufacturing facilities and all kinds of different stuff. That's where you see a lot of the return to office. The government is genuinely concerned about this reality that you're talking about, but nobody quite knows when bad actors are going to start misbehaving.
Right, and when you go back to the physical, the hardware. So we've got Elon Musk in a contract saying, "Hey, I've got to have 1 million of these humanoid robots in such a certain amount of time. I'll become a trillionaire." Right, and as you see their push, and they're cool looking, and it's like. That's like kind of the Jetsons Back to the Future, where like everybody's going to have their robot. And then you look over at China, and China is fighting these things in the UFC cage, not because they're wanting to, win a match. They're wanting to test their capabilities out because they're looking at the armies of the future. Yeah. I mean, so the priorities are very different, but it's so wild. This could go in one direction or go off in a completely different direction, and I'm just not convinced that the people will have control over this. So.
Well, we're almost certainly not going to, and we're testing the boundaries of what people are willing to tolerate today, just by observing the Russian-Ukraine war.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know about you, but when I think about honorably fighting for a homeland or something like that, I think of men fighting for a homeland. Mm-hmm. I don't think about drone strikes. Right. I don't think about people being pulled to the front lines and no chance to survive or to even defend their honor, their country, or themselves against machines that even if they win, there's just going to be another one coming. Mm-hmm. I don't really see that as an honorable way to fight a war. And so if countries are in large building infrastructure for these things, for the wars of the future, the pretty version of that is robots fighting robots.
Yeah, right. I'm sure you've seen, we got a lot of footage of Ukraine. You go on like the 4chan sites and you could see these crazy videos of just a drone just hovering over a couple, of 3 or 4 soldiers, and it's videoing the entire thing, and then out of the blue, it just drops whatever payload it's got, and within 5 seconds you've just got 5 dead people on the ground, and it's like they never even knew it was there till they saw it drop, and that's a scary notion.
Yeah, that's not war to me.
No.
That is that's something else. It's dishonorable, and that seems to be the way that these wars are heading towards. I've heard about quadruped dog style robots being utilized to clear things in Ukraine with flamethrowers and stuff. And I just sit here and think about, like, these things run 30 miles an hour.
Yes.
You know, you can look 10 years ago almost at Boston Dynamics testing the speeds of these things, and by now they're faster, they're more agile, they can climb stairs, you know, and I don't want a future in whether this is the way that people think about the world.
Yes. Yeah, it's very dystopian. I mean, very. And gosh, it's fascinating. I'm going to go off a little bit on, just because we're on the hardware issue. So recently I saw an article. We've seen this for a long time. There's two things here. The dust. I can't remember what it's called again, but it's
like nanodust.
Yes, nanodust. And then China has supposedly made some sort of a flying insect that's completely robotic with a camera, and we've seen videos of swarms. Can you get off in a little bit of that? And what is the nanotechnology, the stuff that they're using with like graphene oxide and things that they can control through frequency? And are you familiar with any of that?
I'm familiar with the technology, but I don't have enough practice on it to speak to it authoritatively. But when we talk about things like insect robots with cameras, you'll notice that if you attempt to buy cameras that are like concealable, even like you want to put it in the bill of a hat or something, they're very regulated, you know? So when we start to get beyond that, if civilians don't have access to it, what are they? They're military parts and pieces. And we don't really have a whole lot of information other than leaks or spec sheets or things that are publicly funded that we have to do open records requests and get them. So every so often this stuff starts to leak out. I have some friends that work in the nanotech industry, and they continually tell me about the advancements in all of that stuff. But I haven't seen anything that would cause me to consider it to be a more human risk than the things we're already facing with the intelligence. And I feel like people are so focused, and the reality and practicable use of intelligence for misuse and weaponry and all those things is here at our doorstep right now. Yes. But we have almost no protections. Like you personally, I don't know what any one of us would do to protect our family from misuse with these things at this point.
I agree. That's why I'm so alarmed by this, because we've just spent the last 10 minutes talking about everything that I consider to be anti-humanity, right? Wars and military and it's like, no, we want the hoverboards from Back to the Future too. We want the Jetsons robot. We want C-3PO. You know, we don't want this. Yeah. And it seems like it's all pointing to that. So
yeah, and there has to be some type of recognition of how do we get to those places. What are the companies that are going to help us to get into those spaces? Right. What are the companies, what are the people, what are the politicians, who are they that are actually fighting for those outcomes? And that's what I don't see. I don't see it in any of my representation. I don't see the valid use cases bubbling up to the top in many cases. Most people are fighting for their jobs just with AI in any way possible. You know, they're losing their jobs to them, or they're leveraging them for their jobs. And that's kind of where the space is. It's out of dependency or need. It's not because, hey, there's this really cool thing that's going to help me. The closest I've seen to that is like the yard lawnmower robots, right? It's like, okay, now I don't got to think about cutting my 3.5 acres anymore.
The Roomba for your grass.
Yeah. That's like the best we've got, and it doesn't even use AI. It just uses traditional.
They're expensive, dude. It's like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. I'm like, geez.
Yeah. Well, but at some point, the bridge has to be. Like, it has to become a bridge for people.
Yes.
You know?
I agree. I would hope so, because that's my next question. So, according to these CEOs and CFOs of these companies, they're like, well, and people ask that question, well, how are you going to handle a population of people that suddenly are no longer needed to work? And it's like, well, that obviously we would have to move over into some digital-based currency, and then we would create a universal basic income where people could live off of it, which is essentially the same thing as socialism, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, they're saying that's what the future looks like.
I'm not really sure it's a future state. I feel like that's where we're at now, and very close to we're just not receiving any of the social benefits of that. I'm probably one of the strongest right-wing advocates that I've met in my life. You're probably, in the same area, but I don't like the safety nets in general where people are taking advantage of them in fraud. But what's the easiest way to get rid of fraud there? You give everybody the same amount of money, and then you eliminate all the fraudulent systems where people are taking advantage. So it's very easy for a governance to start to blend over and justify those behaviors. But what happens when people are like out of money and they're begging for debt relief or whatever they need? It's even easier at that point to start to justify these behaviors. And then what happens when you do have the robots cleaning your rooms and the yard robot doing the yard and you have something picking the garden?
Do we end up like Wall-E, where we're all just like
sitting in the chair?
Big, huge blobs just sitting in the chair slurping on an icy and not a care in the world? I mean, or worst case, I mean, we're going to lose people through this.
That's the picture that Elon Musk and others are painting.
That's right.
That's quite literally what they're saying is you're going to have so much excess labor that you're not going to need to do all of this stuff anymore.
Right.
I'm at a point in my life where I'm still young enough to do a lot of things I want to do. But I do the things that I do now because I love doing them. And that's, if I can spend the whole rest of my life doing those type of things, that's what I consider freedom.
Amen.
And that's where I think people are struggling, is they're no longer free. They're not free to choose what they do with their time. They're not free to choose what they do with their money. They're not free to choose how accessible things are. And these often sound like left-wing talking points until you start to realize that the referees are now the ones owning the teams that are being bet in. For example, the government with our tax dollars owns 10% of Intel.
That's right. Explain the 31 companies here. We're in some uncharted territory here where it's the government is becoming the corporation, right?
Well, you're talking about socialism, so we have to talk about socialism, right? This is in my opinion, what China does, because China's not really a communist country, because communism is no leaders, right? It's the total lack of leadership in that way, and that everybody is a leader. No, that's fantasy in my world. I don't think that that's attainable, nor would I want it to be, actually. But people will often look at me and say, oh, if you don't believe real communism isn't there, you must be a leftist. No, that's not how this is at all. I'm trying to set the stage for the comparison to what a free market capitalist society I thought I lived in is. And the truth of the matter is that China is a state-run capitalist where they're nationalizing things and they're basically regulating everybody and everything. Well, what happens when the Trump administration purchases Intel and U.S. Steel and Dirac and all of these different companies that we've now become an equitable partner in as tax-paying citizens?
Right.
And the money is one thing. Like, all of us are looking at this like we need to get out of debt as a country, as whatever. So we're open to new ideas. And that's great the first year, the first 2 years, 3 years. Whenever this starts to pay some dividends, we start feeling pretty good about it. But the reality is now you as an investor have a new business partner. It's called the United States government. And say you own 40% in a stock, or collectively, all of us as retail own 50% of a stock. We should have pretty direct control over what's happening with that company.
Yes.
But what happens when the government says, no, we want it to behave this way, and they own 5%? Are we going to get our way, or is the government going to get theirs? I think it's pretty clear that the CFOs, the CEOs, they don't really have a whole lot of choice in that matter. They need to go ahead and no longer behave as a capitalist, free market company, and instead they become an extension of the government.
Wow. That's a great analogy, and I want to point something else out. You as well as know that we had at least 20 bills or so that came across our legislative session this last year in Georgia alone that would kind of rein in some guide rails for what's coming. And not only did not a single bill make it across, but when you get up to the federal level, it's the same thing. Our Congress, our Senate, our government doesn't want to touch any of this stuff. And then the people that we elect that should be on the forefront of this kind of these things, they seem to either be the last to know. I can't tell you how many legislators that I've had conversations with about, well, it's something as simple as election integrity, or God forbid you talk about the Constitution, they're laughing you out of their office. But like, it amazes me that we can sit here and have this conversation, but we could go down to the Gold Dome, and I guarantee you 95% of the people that are elected to represent us don't even know what we're talking about, much less could care, or they're lying. I mean, you see what I'm saying?
It's good behavior to assume ignorance instead of malice in those situations.
Yes.
But
sure,
at the ages of our legislators, these are some of the most experienced people in the United States government and the United States country in general. We either don't believe that they're capable of understanding these extremely dynamic concepts and have the right associations and the right education, or we do. Mm-hmm. It's one or the other. You can't continue to play ignorant while enforcing and voting and enacting these things as an authority.
Right.
It's got to be one or the other. Either you need to learn and step down while you're learning, and let some people who are actual authorities in the subject matter get it there and do something. But, part of the problem here is that we don't get representation at almost any level at this point. At the federal level, you just described it. At the state level, it's very similar. But even if you go into your local municipalities and counties and all this different stuff, it doesn't matter if it's like the local power municipality. The chances of it being a controlled little group of people managing those things, because most people don't have the time, inclination, desire, understanding to operate it or to participate in those ways. But it doesn't matter where you go. It can be your local clubs. And it's the same thing time and time again. There's a group of people who are controlling all the authority, the votes, the whatever, and they don't really, they'll placate you for a little bit,
right.
But you're not going to get anything through. And it doesn't matter what level you're talking about. So at what point do we have representation? Where is that representation guiding it? And how many people are being represented? That's a real concern. And if you start to ask those questions, you start to be accused of being somebody in democracy, a Democrat and socialist. But the reality is that we're a republic. And the whole point of the republic was that we were supposed to get really smart people in to represent the broader public.
The best ideas.
Yes. And right now we don't seem to have, we seem to have what you're saying is an ignorant set of people making these incredibly important decisions. I just don't think that aligns with the idea of a republic if it's not it's not true.
Well, and it goes back to the bureaucracy. What do we have we elect a commissioner, right? But the commissioner, there's regional development authorities over them, non-elected bureaucrats that literally hand them down the paperwork and said, this is what we want you to do. Same thing in our Congress. We have an entire set of lobbyists that write these bills over in Utah, and then they circulate, and so bring this, and that's where you see gambling lobbies, you see special interests that buy these positions. And so it's like, how do we break this cycle? No, it seems like no matter what we try to do, we both work hard on election integrity and support all these groups, but like, how are you supposed to take this serious after 6 years and then nothing,
I think the answer is the same answer I get from people who I try to bring into politics to get things accomplished. It is easier to insulate yourself with money than it is to get representation. Yeah. For example, if I go and I put my time into building a small business, am I going to be able to manage the oncoming problems that we're talking about independently from my family and the people in my small circle of influence? Or am I going to get more effect by trying to go into the social circle of civic debate and all of that and actually get a legislation over the line? Well, the chances are, even if you get something over the line, it's not going to be what you thought it was. Right. So who is representing you? No, it's you fighting for yourself constantly. That's not a representational republic. That is some weird quasi, authoritarian thing, in my opinion. I often heard AOC and Bernie Sanders run around the country and talk about how there's oligarchies, you're in an oligarchy. And all of the conservatives and Republicans said, oh, well, they misunderstand the truth of the matter. Well, I don't think about it as they're ignorant. I think about it as they're malicious, right? These people aren't saying, hey, warning about the oligarchy. They're telling you you're in an oligarchy, and this is humiliating you. They're laughing at you for being in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It certainly feels that way, doesn't it? It feels like that we're constantly being laughed at, and I hate that feeling. So what is the answer, Jeremy? Or what? Is it too far gone? Obviously we don't stop fighting, right? I said even if we don't get an ordinance, we're gonna try to rein some of this stuff in, and I think we do see some of the fruits of that labor, right? But ultimately, I think none of this is really going away. Like, it's going to transform what we know as humanity, right?
You asked a very important question there, and I don't want to lose that question, which is, what do we do about this? Well, you have to think about your advantage. I approach this the same way I approach a cyber evaluation, right? What are the threats? What are the risks? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? And what are the advantages of you as an individual and the people you know is agility. Mm-hmm. Your ability to surprise somebody is incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. Like, your ability to make a choice independent of a structure or an organization or anything. They don't have that. They're turning a battleship every single time. And now, even at the local level, when they come down here and they're ramming through a vote on your property tax and shoving all of this thousands of dollars into your property taxes, and there's a room full of 100 people all against it and one person for it, like speaking on the comments, mm-hmm. right? They're genuinely afraid of that. But they're in control of the timing, the meeting, all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. What they're not in control over is the messaging, the social media afterwards. That's why they worry about it. That's why they tell you, oh, you're a keyboard warrior. They try to tell you all of this stuff so you won't do that, and then you'll come and participate in the system that they control, mm-hmm. right? You try to get something through Congress, guess what? You're not getting anything through Congress. It doesn't matter how many people you bring to the table.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many backroom deals you think you have.
Or
and
how much you talk about
some
it.
special person you know, any of that stuff. It's not happening. What they don't like is you showing up and in the town square, like Charlie Kirk did, with a table, and you're saying, hey, you guys like what our commissioners are doing? Tell me the good and the bad. Mm-hmm. We're going to write it down, and we're going to send a letter to the commissioners based on what you say. You literally put it on here, we send it to them. The next day, the commissioners are going to be like, what are we going to do with all of this? We have 180 people all dying, it's public space, right? You show up to any of these things and do what they're not expecting, they have to then adapt the entirety of the plan to that. So we need to leverage our agility. We need to realize that is our power as individuals, as people. And when we talk about collectivizing, that doesn't mean make 20, 30, 40 friends and then just all come together on the same thing. Mm-hmm. You don't all need to be on the same page about everything. You need to have a general idea where you're going, and then you need to leverage your advantages.
Okay, so I guess give us a few pointers. So I'm here, you're here, we've got all of the stuff that's happening around us. A lot of it's out of our control, but give us a little bit of your insight. What should we be looking at through all of the hype and all of the fear? Like, what are you looking at? What should I be focused on moving through this?
Technologically, people need to start educating themselves on AI more so than they are. My general feel of it is that most people think they have a moderate understanding of what AI is capable of, and the higher levels of them are just, I think, outside of the bounds of understanding for most people. So find some way to get a picture, use the term frontier with somebody who knows what it is, and get them to show you. Even in some of the communications you've had so far, you kind of mix up Anthropic, Claude, Codex, OpenAI, like all these different things together, but really start to understand and appreciate that there are types of AI that's like a chat that you're working with, and there are types of AI that are trying to do work. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the things that are breaking out, it's not the chatbot that you're interacting with that's doing that. The line is starting to become more blurred, but those are things like Claude Code, which can write code and do things. Mm-hmm. Those are things like Codex, which is ChatGPT's version of Claude Code. So if you want to interact with something really smart, you go and use ChatGPT. If you want it to do work on your behalf, you use Codex, which is from them. So each of these are, bifurcating on those lines. And so having an understanding of what's possible with those doing models is important. The main thing to take away from it is the ability to test. So you often get things that people call hallucinations. It's like, oh, well, it doesn't really know this, or it's probably wrong. We have a lot of people writing off AI in that way. When you step into that first level of, and you don't need the frontier for this, there are older versions of AI that do this. What they do is they do research, then they build tests, and then they test the work that they did against the tests. So if the test fails, they know they did the work wrong. They just do it again. They do this so rapidly. And this is the same way. If like you wanted to build a roof on a house, you do a few little area. Oh, did I do it wrong? Oh, it's kind of weak here. Same thing. And so that's what's accelerating, is that iteration cycle. So start to understand what that is. All of this stuff about, is it real? Is it not? Like, is a video I'm watching a deep fake or something like that? If you can't tell the difference now, you've already missed the boat. I hate to say it that frankly, but it's only going to get better. And people who can spot them using like little artifacts and stuff, as humans, maybe some people are going to pick up, but you really are raising the IQ level required to notice those differences to the point where the average person's never going to know one way or the other.
Right.
So I think that those are the most important things to really familiarize yourself with. But then I really going back to the political side, I think people need to start asking, what does good leadership look like? Am I getting representation? Where am I getting value out of any of this? Like very fundamental things. And if you're not, then pull back. Be less tolerant of accepting false representation and things like that. And instead build for yourself. If the only thing you can trust is your family, then build something with your family. If the only thing you can do is send a letter every single day to the commissioners, make sure a letter gets there every single day. But don't let another day pass doing none of it. That's the biggest thing. Don't let it pass watching Netflix.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. So I got a philosophical question. Are we, as human beings, are we going to survive this? What do you think? Do you think we're going to survive this, man?
Yeah, we're in complete opinion territory now. There's not a whole lot of backing anybody can give for this. If it is the end, if this is how it all ends, my Christian faith gives me the value that I get to escape this place then. You know?
Yeah.
That is the positive look of that. Is that we're not left behind to deal with all of this stuff in a rotting world and all of the bad things that come along with that one day. People think about death as this moment of good and evil and all of this different stuff. But for the believers, like myself, it's, and I'm not trying to leave this earth by any means. I'm here to do my job. It's a moment of, okay, now you guys are left with what you produced. The fruit of your outcomes is what you get to consume.
Yeah. Yep, I think that's the question, man. And I'm along for the ride. I am going to continue to fight. I'm going to continue to fight for humanity on this front. But we're along for this ride, and I think you're right. I think we need to understand it a little more than we do. So, I always give my guests the last word, and I feel like we're kind of wrapping it up. So before I do that, I want to thank you for coming up here. I have so much enjoyed the conversations, and to me, you are a wealth of information and knowledge. And in more ways, we could have went any other topic, election integrity, and it's not for a lack of wanting to pick your brain about it. But again, I think the fight right now is going to be what does a world look like with a new species of AI, and like, would elections even matter if it's controlling it? So, and we all know that we're not getting away from electronics anytime soon. So that's why I think I wanted to focus more on this. But I want to give you the final word. What do you want to tell the audience out there?
That's a challenging thing. There's a lot of things people want to say. People want to hear, people want to do. My thoughts are that we should not have fear of almost anything, and certainly not fear of discussion. If I can just get one thing across to as many people as broadly as possible, to not stifle the discussion, not stifle the debate, to be accepting of opinions as just opinions, and to to demand facts and proof and evidence of the things and challenge them. If I go back biblically, John says to test the spirits. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we need to be doing. We have to test those boundaries of, is this true or is this trust? Is it truth or am I trusting it? And if we can elevate the conversation to that, I think all of us will come out better.
Well said, man. I think that's the journey we're on, man, is focus on the truth no matter what, and just keep shedding the light on it. So, well, I've had a blast, and I really appreciate you being here. I would love to do this again sometime, so let's hope that we can bring you back. So
Yeah, it's a nice trip up here, and I enjoyed this. Thank you very much for having me.
And folks, we hope you enjoyed it too on Small Town Underground. We're all about the education here. This is what is going on. We all need to familiarize ourselves with the future of AI and how this is going to impact our lives and our communities. And are we going to be able to hold hands with this thing and walk through it, or is this going to turn into something different? So I appreciate it, and you guys have a wonderful evening. I'll see you later.